Okay, I think we can get started now. Thank you everyone for coming along on Wednesday morning. My name is Grambau and I'm talking about I'm Not Your Boss, I Just Run the Group Chat. Thank you to our sponsors for sponsoring GCAP 2025. Alrighty, this is me, let's go. There we go, okay. Right, so yeah, good job for making it here on the Wednesday, day 3. It can often be challenging to come along to these things on the last day, so I do appreciate it. Excuse me. All right, now that we've officially started and I've shut the doors and it's too late to kick me out of here, I'm going to start with a confession for everybody. This is a true fact and it's a little bit embarrassing, but in the interest of sharing and promoting strength through vulnerability, I wanted to start by saying that the one and only time I took Management 101 at uni, I actually failed. So I'm not sure if that's going to increase the buy-in for my talk or not, but I've come a long way since then. That was 18 years ago, so I like to think I would pass it today. I would want to hope so. But needless to say, when I started in leadership, I was guilty of many of the 5 misconceptions which I'd like to explore today. I think, it wasn't because I was, an asshole or I didn't care about my team. It was mostly because I just didn't know any better. I didn't have the training or the experience at the time. And it turns out many of the ways that we lead are instinctively wrong. And that's the interesting thing about leadership is that it's oftentimes counterintuitive and inverse to what your gut reaction might be. Before I dive in, I'll just let everyone know this is my first time running this talk, so I appreciate your patience in advance. Thank you. Alrighty, I went off on a journey trying to figure out how to be a better leader. I wanted to understand the psychology behind effective leadership to avoid repeating many of the same mistakes that I was doing. And today I'd like to share with you, what I've learned over the last 10 years or so of working in indie games in a leadership position, in the hope of some of what we discuss will be valuable to you all. And a small disclaimer, this is my experience of working with small teams, sort of between 4 to 8, mostly in the indie space. So I do like to hope that a lot of these things we discuss will be transferable, but just keep that in mind. All right, so who am I? So I started in leadership, I guess, when I was younger. I was working in retail in clothing stores. I managed some small clothing stores and I wasn't really very good at it. I then came back to study as a mature age student, studying games. And then since then I've worked on a few notable games. I've worked on Ink or Swim, which is a mobile game which came out 2018 now, so long ago. I was lucky that was featured by Apple. I then made another game which I directed called Tombster, which bombed. And then most recently, I was a game director on 420 Blaze It 2. So I have experienced some of the highs and lows of game development over the years. I'll just start by speaking a little about 420 Blaze It 2. If you haven't played it, I want to give you an understanding of what a game that looks like this might be like. And to do so, I've highlighted a few of my favorite reviews from Steam. We're very lucky, we get a lot of creative reviews, as you can imagine, given the look of the game. This is the best virus I've ever played. That was cool. We've also had, Game of the Year, story goated, graphics goated, humor goated, rating 420 out of 69. My doctor recommended me this as an epilepsy test. And finally, my favorite one, which is actually a negative review, too good, make it worse. So this hopefully will paint the kind of picture, if you haven't played the game, of what you might be able to expect from the experience. Now, before we move into the content, I'll be following a format today, and I assume most of you all like structure, because you're here at a leadership talk on Wednesday. So I'll be following the format of going with a misconception, and then a reality check where I try to debunk those misconceptions with the help of scientific literature or psychological models. And then we'll finish with some strategies that hopefully will be helpful for folks to take into their workplace. Today I'll be covering the importance of leadership, why it's important not only in indie games, but also just games in general, especially right now. We'll talk a lot about psychological safety, emotional intelligence, trust and autonomy. Take this off, clinking around. Delivering feedback, leadership, self-care, which is super important. And if you get to that slide, you're not allowed to leave. You must stay here for that slide. It's a big thing that folks who are in leadership don't often, they often ignore that, right? And put the team first, which can have detrimental effects. So please stick around for that slide if you're still here at that point. And then also we'll talk about the references that I used to make this talk. Okay, so why it's important is we've had a history of bad leadership in games over the years. I'm sure folks are aware of the 2022 YouTube channel People Make Games. They released a video called Investigating 3 Indie Superstars Accused of Emotional Abuse. At the time, it was a discussion topic for many people in games. And the video investigates allegations of emotional abuse and problematic behavior by 3 prominent figures in the indie game scene. Essentially, the video states that the problem isn't just a few toxic people. It's a wider culture issue that highlights an urgent need for accountability, protections, and healthier work structures. This has an impact on the individual. Toxic leadership obviously can lead towards trauma, both physical and mental distress, burnout, and something that folks will often carry with them into other workplaces and other studios down the line as well. There's an impact on the industry as well, right? So good people leave. It damages the industry's credibility, and the space looks less attractive for investors. It's arguably more important in small teams. Individual actions and decisions have a greater ripple effect. Small teams often operate in environments where life moves quickly, fast decisions are made, and so it's essential for leadership to be proactive there and consistent to prevent tasks from falling through the cracks. On top of which, if you've got a small team, so you've got 6 people, and you have 2 programmers, and one of them goes down, you'll lose 50% of your coding team. So we don't have the luxury of being in a larger organization where we can fill those gaps more easily. So anything you can do as a leader to avoid that is critical. And finally, good leadership improves how you interact with people in everyday life. These are good skills, soft skills, psychology skills that can help improve your communication, help build trust with people. So yeah, just generally, these are all very transferable to your daily life. Okay, jumping into it. So first misconception. Often folks think if we hire good people, the team dynamics will take care of itself. And in essence, you can describe a psychologically safe environment here as a space where people know they won't be punished for admitting a mistake, asking a question, or offering a wild idea. This first one's interesting, excuse me, because to a degree this is somewhat true. If you hire people who do value psychological safety, they will help create that environment. They can often be self-monitoring and actively contribute to creating a culture of safety. But leaders sometimes assume that just because their team is experienced, that they'll naturally feel comfortable speaking up or addressing problems and sharing feedback, and particularly pitching wild ideas. Which isn't true. It does take a lot of effort to create these spaces. So the importance of psychological safety can be highlighted by Google's Aristotle research, which is essentially into a group of teams to discuss or to find the common characteristics of an effective team. What's interesting here is that psychological safety was the #1 identified component of these effective teams. So that's not talent or pay or tenure, it's the safety to speak up. That was the identifying factor in high-performing teams. So the bottom one here is impact of your work. You then have meaning of your work, structure, and clarity of your work. So the bottom 3 relate to your work as an individual, and interestingly, the top 2 relate to the team dynamics. So the dependability of your team and the psychological safety of your team environment. So it's quite interesting that as a leader, you have a lot of power there to help foster these 2 really important components in effective leadership. So how do you go about creating a psychologically safe environment? Well, I think the first thing is to understand that creativity and innovation can't happen without risk. So taking risk is probably the greatest strength I believe an indie game has. We can't compete with AAA games on budget, resources, team size, oftentimes IP, but we do have the advantage in pushing boundaries and being creative. Oops, that's not what I meant to do. Sorry, 1 second. Okay. Establish team agreements. So ideally you want to do this early in a project, but at any point in time it's good to do this. You want to get the team together, either run a small workshop or a group discussion. Make sure everyone's a part of this process when coming up with these ground rules for communication. You don't want to just be a leader who's sort of throwing these things down from upon high. You want to include people. And some of these agreements might look like we challenge ideas, not people, or we value progress over perfection. Having these explicit norms helps everybody, especially new team members. When they come into the group, they understand that they're that they're welcome and their input and questions are welcome. Normalize asking for help and admitting mistakes. So as a leader, you kind of want to model the behavior that you'd like to see from your team. So things like, I'm sorry, I'm not good at this. Or perhaps it's, I need some help with this particular thing. Or I was wrong about this feature, let's pivot. I think it's really important how you talk about your own work as well. It signals to everyone that it's okay not to be perfect. And how you react when others make mistakes is crucial too. We'll dive into giving feedback later on in this talk, which is one of my favorite elements of the talk. But I think, the same goes for asking for help. Admit freely you don't know the answer. And help model that behavior for your team. Step in where those agreements are broken. So once you've made some of these established agreements with the team, if you notice that a team member is overstepping in some of these areas, you want to get onto it pretty quickly. In a compassionate way, of course. Most recently in my team, we had sort of person A and person B. I'll just discuss them as. Person A was making a lot of jokes at person B's expense. It was in a jovial, kind of friendly way. They are friends. But it went on a bit too long, and I kind of picked up on this throughout the meetings. And I checked in with person B just to say, like, hey, I've noticed that these jokes have been continuing. How do you feel about this? Is this all good, or do you want me to maybe say something? And sure enough, person B was like, actually, yeah, this is like impacting me, and I've had to after some meetings, I've had to take a walk around the block a few times to try to clear my head and to sort of create some distance and emotional space from some of the things that have been saying in the meetings. And so I made sure at that point that I went back to person A, and we had a very, quickly as well, timely went, I think it was the next day, and we had a discussion. I said, look, I know you don't mean to do these things. I know that you're friends, and this is like a ribbing thing that you're doing, but unfortunately, this is affecting person B now, and it's gotten to the point now where it's detrimental to them. So I think it's really important to get on top of this early. Person A was very receptive to this conversation. They didn't mean to have the effect that they were having. I don't think they even realized that they were having the effect that they were having. So yeah, just make sure that you do step in as quickly as possible when those things do happen. Allow opportunity for everyone to contribute. So you might have group discussions. Oftentimes, these loud extroverts can dominate these chats. Try to make sure everyone's voice is heard. You can use a more formal structure. You can say, okay, let's hear a quick thought from each person. We'll do like a little round robin of ideas, for example. Or just keep a mental note, perhaps, as you go along of who hasn't really said too much during the talk, and give them space to share their ideas. Don't put them on the spot, but offer them the opportunity to speak up if they would like. And then finally, sharing wins and sharing mistakes. So I think one of the most important things here is just, the way I view it is if you do something great, you say, we did it. And if someone fucks something up, you say, we did it. That's the essential element to that. Okay, misconception 2. As a leader, I should leave my emotions at the door. So today I believe, at the moment, discussions around emotion in the workplace might seem obvious, but 20 years ago, It was a bit of a no-no in some workplaces, and 30 years ago, it was no workplaces were discussing this. So even though a lot of younger folks coming into the industry would think this is like a norm, I do want to highlight the importance of this, and the fact that many leaders that still think professionalism means showing, keeping your emotions out of it and showing to everybody that you have all the answers and you're perfect. And some leaders worry that showing empathy or vulnerability will undermine their authority, and the misconception sometimes that empathy is weakness or at best unrelated to results. But the truth is, it's the opposite. Empathy is actually rocket fuel for performance. It's perhaps the most effective tool you have as a leader, I believe. There was a study here in 2023 by Ernst & Young. They studied more than 1,000 US employees and found that workers that feel mutual empathy between the company leaders and employees led to increases in efficiency, job satisfaction, creativity, idea sharing, and innovation. And massive boosts too, right? Not just like small needle movers, but these are like incredible boosts to these different categories. Right. So there are 3 different types of empathy. There's simply knowing, we'll start with cognitive empathy for a moment, which is simply knowing how a person feels. It's sort of the understanding an aspect of see, okay, like I know what they're thinking and I can kind of understand it to a degree. You've then got compassionate empathy, which is effectively when you can feel their perspective as though their emotions were contagious. And then the combination of those two is effective empathy, where you both understand and feel a person's predicament and are moved to take action to help them. But in order to achieve any of these, you need to listen. Active listening particularly, but empathy in action is about listening. It starts with regular habits like one-on-one check-ins where you get the team together, hopefully once a month if possible, see how people are doing, see how they're feeling, ask them what they need help with, what can I help with, or how are you feeling about the project? Say, how are you feeling? Don't ask, how's the project going? So I'll say, yeah, it's good. You want to really ask some open-ended questions and delve into any roadblocks that they might be experiencing. My favorite saying in this regard to this point is, you have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and you should use them in that ratio. Show that you care. Start off meetings by asking people how they're doing. Check in on them in their lives. Write these things down too. Like if you might have a conversation and they'll say, I've got to go to the dentist on Wednesday. And so you write down, okay, Jess is going to the dentist on Wednesday. And then on Thursday, if you have a meeting, say, how was the dentist? Show that, follow up. Show that you're able to, you actually give a shit about their lives. And writing it down for me is helpful because I forget a lot of things. So it's a cool tactic that I've employed and it works really well. And then finally, vulnerability. So in a similar study, they showed that empathy, all of those things we spoke about before, those different components actually decline if the employee, in this case, feels as though the empathy is forced, it's fake. So it's challenging. You want to show empathy and actually connect with your team, but fake attempts to do this will actually have detrimental effects. One way you can kind of bridge that gap is by being vulnerable yourself. Empathy is a two-way street. If you're able to demonstrate that you're human, your team will reciprocate. This might mean admitting a mistake to your team, as we mentioned earlier, just acknowledging you're having a tough day, or admitting to failing Management 101 when you were 23 years old. All right, self-awareness. So self-awareness can be often referred to also as meta-awareness in this space. I will refer to it as self-awareness for the sake of the talk, but they're somewhat interchangeable. So I think a key step, for me at least, for improving my empathy was my self-awareness. So effectively the radar for what's happening in your life, what's happening with work, and what's happening to you as a leader will help you see things before they happen and help you manage things as they happen. Essentially, it's the practice of attempting to recognize the emotional state that you're currently in. So the image here we see, there's the higher cortex, which I'll refer to as the prefrontal cortex for the sake of this talk, and the amygdala. So the amygdala plays a big role, and some of you might know this, in fight or flight. When you're in a situation where you're stressed and you find yourself faced with a challenge immediately, the amygdala kicks in and acts almost immediately. Whereas your prefrontal cortex deals a lot more of the slower thinking, the logical analysis, planning for the future, self-control, that kind of stuff. But the thing is that when you're faced with these threats or stresses, the amygdala actually hijacks your prefrontal cortex. So you're not able to really rationally comprehend what's happening in that moment. It was designed this way for survival purposes, because if you're out in the wild and you're chased by an apex predator, you don't want to stop and think about whether it's a good idea to run or not. So that kicks in and off you go. But in the workplace, instead of an apex predator, it could be our boss or teammate who trigger amygdala response, and we certainly don't want to revert to a primal state in those environments. So you can often tell that you're being influenced by your amygdala because you feel very strong negative emotions very suddenly. You might feel extreme anger or fear, and you may also notice a physical response like sweating or a change to your breathing. One way to prevent this is to practice this self-awareness, essentially taking a moment to pause, attempting to recognize which emotional state you're in, label it if possible, essentially just noticing and labeling things that are happening to you and what you're feeling. The cool thing is, if you're able to do that, and you take a moment to label those emotions, you actually move part of your brain processing from the amygdala back to the prefrontal cortex, which will help you make more considered and mature decisions. One definition of maturity that I really like, that I've been trying to connect with, is that maturity is widening the gap between impulse and action. Even if you can't label your emotions, though, just taking that moment to pause can be really critical. The amygdala cools off a little bit, which allows time for the prefrontal cortex to kick in again. My therapist refers to it as fast and slow thinking. So if you're in a space where you feel like you're fast thinking, try and slow down. Literally anything you do after a pause will be better than whatever your impulsive action might be, because as a leader, doing something impulsive can be incredibly damaging. You might hurt someone accidentally, or you might also make people feel off, jeopardizing the team's psychological safety and leading you to do repair work later on. Okay, misconception 3, trust and autonomy. So a lot of folks feel like if they're not in total control, everything will fall apart. This is the micromanagement trap. Indie leaders often wear multiple hats, and we feel deeply invested in each area of our projects. It's easy to believe that trusting too much and giving team members autonomy is risky or inefficient. The misconception here being that tight control equals speed and quality, whereas trust and freedom are a gamble. But the thing is, when you give skilled people room to make these decisions, two great things happen. They take ownership, and they often surprise you with what might be different or potentially better solution. When you don't give them this freedom, they'll do exactly what you say and no more, which might seem efficient, but actually you're capping innovation and learning. So I'll talk about autonomy first. Autonomy is a component of trust. It's very powerful, though. It's one of the 3 components of social determination theory. So SDT is a framework that, according to the SDT, once you satisfy these 3 fundamental needs, you're able to foster intrinsic motivation, self-regulation, and psychological well-being. All of this is essentially like a roadmap for all of us. So anytime that we feel like we have competence over what we're doing, we're skilled in a way and we feel confident with it, we have autonomy, we have control over our lives, and we're connected to those who work with us and those working with us. Those 3 things combine to help foster intrinsic motivation. So autonomy is exceptionally powerful. It doesn't mean you don't have protocols or standards or systems in place, but essentially, like beyond the core requirements, oftentimes you can give people a lot of freedom and leeway to do the job in a way that fits them. Cool. Autonomy in task choice. There are 3 ways that I'm going to outline today you can improve autonomy. One of them is task choice. When possible, give your team an opportunity of which tasks they would like to work on. Allow them the opportunity to say, like, I'm interested in that, I would like to be involved. For example, if you're delegating tasks ahead of time, and so you've got two programmers, get them together, see what are their strengths, what do they enjoy working on. I was lucky enough to have one of my programmers actually like working on UI, which is a rare thing. And so I was able to delegate a lot of the UI tasks to him, and he loved that. And whereas the other person could do more creative work, not creative work necessarily, but like implementing gameplay mechanics and other things that we needed in the project as well. And also, like I mentioned, ask how they're feeling about the task as they go through. Also, autonomy in task execution. So a lot of times, we might have a way that we want someone to do the job. We might explain a lot of things to them. A lot of times, though, this might just be like personal preference. Like, for example, maybe there's some specific software that you like, but actually isn't the best tool for the job. Or maybe the person just prefers to use different tools, and that's cool too. Like right now, for example, like my team, I think we're using like 3 different Git clients at the moment. I'm on Tortoise Git. 2 of my team members are using Bitbucket for desktop, and then my program is using some crazy thing that's included in their code editor. But I think we all have personal preferences of how we want to interact with Git and in our particular team. And aside from actually making sure that things are committed properly, and beyond the usual Git fuckery, there is always something that goes wrong. It hasn't caused us any problems. We're happy to have 3 different programs in this instance. And then finally, autonomy in work hours. So it's not suitable for everybody, but offering flexibility in work hours or even work locations can really flick that autonomy switch for your team. And let's be real, like how many times are we working and we do have the freedom to be able to say, go to an appointment at lunchtime or go to the gym or see a friend in the afternoon. It really does kick in that feeling of freedom, and I think it's extremely powerful. There's a concept, so I'm going to jump over to trust for a second now after talking about autonomy. There's a concept by Shopify's CEO, Toby Lutke, that I love called the trust battery. Essentially, it's a measurement, a conceptual measurement of where your trust is with any individual person at any point in time. So for example, you imagine that each new teammate starts with a trust battery that's 50% charged, and then each interaction you have with them either charges or drains it. The lower the battery, the less risk people are going to take, and the less effort they'll put in beyond the bare minimum. But when trust is high, relationships become stronger, and the team unlocks more potential opportunities. So for example, the different things you can do to either charge or drain the trust battery. You can charge it by keeping your commitments, showing support to your team, including reasoning behind your decisions, involving them in those decisions, and treating them fairly. You drain the battery when you break promises, are inconsistent, micromanage them. You're complicit in conflicts, so you either foster or ignore conflict, or you dismiss their ideas. Just something to keep in mind, this is really cool, I think. It's nothing that's necessarily measurable, but this relationship exists between each of us in a workplace. So having some understanding of where you might be, where the trust battery might be with anyone at any point in time is super important. Cool. Misconception 4. I have to choose between being nice and being honest. So this section about delivering feedback is super critical, I think. A lot of times people mess this up. And there's also a misconception that in order to the misconception that empathetic leadership means avoiding these hard truths, but it's not about that at all. You don't need to become a blunt arsehole to get these results, nor do you need to bite your tongue. Neither is effective in the long run. In the book called Radical Candor, in 2017, author Kim Scott created this matrix which identifies 4 individual quadrants when giving feedback. In this particular example, she uses the situation of a colleague having their fly undone. Don't know why. I wasn't involved in it. We'll start with obnoxious aggression to start with. So these obviously are things when, in this example, it's like shouting at them saying, hey, look, your fly's down. I think in the workplace, particularly in games, it could be just being very critical of someone's ideas. It can sometimes linger into personal attacks. It fosters fear and resentment grows. And you've got a person here who doesn't care but wants to challenge people. And that can be detrimental to the team. Similarly, if you don't care and you don't challenge people, you just don't really give a shit, you might say to them, yeah, look, whatever, you always look good. You don't actually have any intention of improving the situation. That's kind of like the worst type of leader, I think. And then above that is ruinous empathy, and I'll be honest, I've been oftentimes myself guilty of this, where I've been too nice. I've tried to be too nice, and a lot of this is actually like selfishly protecting my own feelings, my own concerns about feeling embarrassed or not wanting to call people out for fear of creating conflict. And so over the recent years, I've tried to shift more into the green zone where I do care, but I also want to challenge people, and I'd like to be able to try to work towards a better solution for the project. This involves being honest with people, adhering to like a growth mindset. And the example here is great, actually, because you're whispering to them that your fly's down. You're not creating this. You're not drawing this attention to them in a team environment. You're doing it discreetly, but you still show that you care and want to fix the issue. Okay, so how do you deliver feedback in that way? I think the first step is to build relationships first, so it's much easier to accept criticism from somebody who you know cares about you. You want to invest in honest human connection regularly with your team, so those one-to-ones, casual chats about non-work interests, anime, those little things that you can do. Oftentimes, we have opportunities for this at the beginning of a meeting, if it's online or if it's in person, perhaps just sort of like around the lunch table area, whatever it might be. There are always these opportunities, and make sure that you're using them as much as you can. You're going to want to consider if it's necessary to share feedback even. You want to make sure that you're not just nitpicking a lot of small things. Like, is this just a difference of opinion? Was I expecting something different? And they submitted something that sort of a bit of a paradigm shift for me, and it's thrown me off for a bit of a loop. Is there a pattern emerging? Do I actually need to fix this? Because giving feedback can actually reduce your engagement. If you find yourself nitpicking all these things like I mentioned, with small change requests, you could be improving the work by a small amount, but you'll also decrease that individual's motivation by a larger amount. And then finally, ask them if they're in a place to receive feedback. It might be a bad day. They might have missed lunch, or they've received some bad news. Maybe they're anxious about an upcoming GCAP talk. Make sure that they're in the right headspace for it, and they'll be receptive to it. If they're in a compromised emotional state, they'll take the feedback worse than they would normally. Okay, so you've done all these things. You're finally ready to give feedback. There are a bunch of different feedback formats people like to use. I personally love the very simple observation, impact, action format. So the observation where you share what you've observed, be really specific there, and focus on behaviors or actions versus the person as a whole, obviously. Impact, so the impact that this person's actions are having on the project or the team, and then take action. So the action component is the most important component here. You want to work with that person to create a solution. And oftentimes this is in the format of an open-ended question. For example, like I noticed a bug that happens when the player has these 3 items equipped. It's bad because this is soft locking the game. How can we go about fixing this problem? Or can you think of any solutions we might be able to use to fix this? Open-ended questions get people involved, and they often also help you identify things you may not have realized. For example, a lot of times I'll be like, hey, can we do this? And like, no, we can't because of these reasons. And I'm like, yep, that's fair. That makes a lot of sense. Get perspective on the task in that final step, in that final action step where you ask them questions. Timely, make sure the feedback's timely. You don't want too much feedback to stack up. People have the capacity to only receive so much feedback at once. Also, it's important to have them understand it while the feedback is fresh in their mind, the actions and the context is fresh in their mind. And obviously, it helps stop those behaviors and negative impacts on the project as early as possible. And then finally, no sandwiches. I don't like the compliment sandwich. There are two reasons why. First of all, people start to expect it coming. If you work with someone for long enough, you get used to them saying, okay, here comes the positive stuff, and they don't even really hear it. They're just waiting for the next negative thing. And the second reason is it can overshadow the critical feedback that you're trying to give somebody. So particularly if you front load a lot of compliments or positive feedback at the beginning of your feedback session, you might be like, oh, this is really good, this is really good, this is really good, and I need help with this, and we need to step up this area. The person might think, oh, I'm doing great. I've had 3 good things and only one negative thing. Wherein perhaps the leader in that case really wanted to emphasize the importance of that critical feedback, but it's been overshadowed by the positive ones that have come before it. All right. Our last misconception here is leadership self-care, and this actually comes from, this misconception is something that I wrote yesterday in the office when discussing self-care with the team. I hope Winston doesn't mind, but I'll share this. Essentially, Winston was saying how important meditation was for him, and that he did this a lot when he was stressed. And he found that a lot of times, he wouldn't meditate until he was stressed. And I think this is a pretty common thing that folks think that they'll focus on when they need to, because leaders often have trouble prioritizing self-care, especially in the face of looming deadlines and tight production timelines. A lot of our emotional energy is spent directed towards the team, and it feels like something that we can put off until later. But in reality, you've got to put on your mask first, and you can't help people if you don't help yourself. Self-care is integral to creating a successful, sustainable, and empathetic workplace. And oftentimes, leads are the people who need this the most. We absorb a lot of our team's emotional stress. We shoulder responsibility for delivering projects, liaising with critical stakeholders, etc. It's super critical. And I think when you're feeling emotionally stressed or drained, it can be really hard to show interest in the welfare of others and show that empathy that you need to. It makes it harder to support those around you. The bottom line here is that leaders who take care of themselves are much better able to take care of those who they lead. This is the mental health continuum model. It views mental health as a spectrum rather than a dichotomy. I like this framework because it emphasizes how mental health is dynamic and it can fluctuate. It emphasizes that people are somewhere within this spectrum at any point in time. And in fact, most people might move along this spectrum throughout the day. You might start the day feeling like you're in a thriving position, you feel calm and positive, things are going well, and then you get some feedback about a bad bug or a looming deadline or something pops up. You kind of move temporarily, hopefully, into the surviving state. And as a leader, it's our job to identify when this is happening for our team and help to move them into those green zones, essentially. A lot of the things we've spoken about today will hopefully help you do that, but it's something to keep in mind, not only for your team, but for yourself as well. When you start a meeting, maybe check in with yourself, say, where am I at today? Am I thriving? Am I surviving? Where am I at? And try to push yourself, find ways, perhaps through these self-care things we're about to speak about, to help you move you into that green zone. And ironically, the best time to perform self-care is when you're in those green zones. So, it's much harder to, thank you, focus on whether you're much harder to focus on your team when you're in the surviving state, and it's much harder to develop new strategies and steps of self-care when you're in that space. All right. So, how can you look after yourself? These are some of the basics to go over. Sleep, I'll talk a moment about sleep. It's super important. It's obviously something that is challenging to get throughout GCAP. It's quite interesting how even just the difference between 1 hour, 7 hours of sleep, or 8 hours of sleep can make a very big cognitive difference. The tests they've done here, the study that they did, showed that cognitive performance did drop significantly after only 7 hours of sleep. I think I've been performing my own research on this week. I think I had about 6 hours last night myself. But fortunately, I wrote this talk when I was in the optimal zone, so that's all good. But yeah, just prioritize it not only for your cognitive ability, but also your physical health. You burn more fat if you get more sleep. You retain more muscle mass as well. Your body composition benefits a lot. Exercise, get those endorphins going. Even if it's a small thing, right? Like start small, just go for a 10-minute walk. Just do something, move a little bit, do some stretching, take an hour break, go fold some washing if you're at home, or go for a walk around the block if you're in the city, for example, or somewhere out in your studio. Just do something if you can. It's really, really critical. Diet and hydration, like I'm always on my team about drinking their water. They probably hate me for it. But hydration's a huge thing. When you're dehydrated, you're more tired. You're more likely to be in those lower zones we just looked at before. Yeah, it's super important. Also connection, like have some time away from games. Share things with your friends. Have time with friends that are outside of the game space. Super important. A lot of times I feel like we can just silo away and work on our thing and kind of be this like wild hermit in the lab. But I think it's really important to step away whenever you can. For me, learning has been really motivating over the years. Some days I wake up and I just don't want to do anything. And I'll watch like a 15-minute YouTube video, and before I know it, I'm like, oh, this is really, really exciting. I'm interested in this topic. And that spurs me on for the rest of the day. Try it. If you feel like you're really a bit, you wake up one day and I'm just not in a great headspace right now, find a video that is interesting to you, that you might learn one or two things from, and see how it impacts your day afterwards. Therapy, yeah, I'm a big advocate for therapy. It's super critical, I think, for everybody. It's really, really important for leaders. Please go to therapy. And then finally, escape. This one's a little bit contentious. Some folks think that escapism is altogether negative. I personally don't. I think in moderation it is important. I think it's important to decompress sometimes, and as I mentioned, find an element of removing yourself from the team. This could obviously involve a few different things. Some of these are more negative behaviors than others, and if you want to catch me outside, I can talk to you about escapism a lot. I'm a master at it. But yeah, I think in moderation it's important, so keep that in mind as well. Okay, these are the references that I've used to create the talk today. These are all really, really good. These are the ones that I've chosen. I've gone through a few others, but this is where I gathered my inspiration and information from. The last two are really great. The Jesse Schell GDC talk in 2017 is amazing. And I really like the podcast from Dave Stachowake, Coaching for Leaders. They've been running for like 10 years. It's incredible. It's on Spotify. It's free. Well, it's not free because it's on Spotify, but it's on Spotify if you have that. And just to wrap up, I've covered a lot of ground today. Hopefully I've helped to introduce you to some new concepts or strategies that you can help employ. But just remember, that efficiency in game dev isn't necessarily about working faster or harder. It's about clearing away barriers, many of them emotional and interpersonal, that slow your team down. Thank you. Do we have any questions? Comments? Yes? Oh, do we need a microphone? I can hear, it's okay. Okay.
Hi.
Hi.
Thank you for your talk. It's a little bit a little long question, but is there ever a scenario in a team where you give them too much autonomy? So like, for example, if, especially in the indie team, some of them might be new to the industry or newer, and they're like, I want to try this, I want to experiment with this, I have this interest. And in the scenario where, let's say there's two different people on the same role, and they prefer certain things, or they want different levels of responsibility for different things, how would you start approaching that conversation? Because sometimes maybe there's tasks that none of them want to do because you give them so much choice.
Yeah, so I guess good question. The question was, is it possible to give folks too much autonomy sometimes? I think there are some driving factors behind that. I mentioned, setting up guardrails and structures for them. I think having a really good, clear vision that you're trying to achieve, perhaps also some good game pillars, either from a design perspective or a development perspective. Making sure you have a lot of a clear direction of where you want to go is probably the first step. And then in terms of like maybe having two team members that are wanting to work on the same thing, perhaps you could think of some sort of trade-offs there, where maybe 1 month you get to have the opportunity to work on something you really enjoy, and then maybe the next month it's something that needs to be done for the project. That kind of idea, like maybe like, one for yourself and one for the team kind of thing might help. That's probably how I would approach it. I want to give them freedom to make those choices, but with an element of compromise involved, which is present in every element of game dev. Hope that answers your question. Anything else? Yep.
I really liked what you said earlier in your talk about showing your own or demonstrating your own vulnerability. But how do you balance that as a leader when showing too much vulnerability may just give the team the impression that everything's on fire and they feel less safe?
Yeah, it's a really good question. So it's about balancing how much vulnerability that you show. I think it could be done sparingly. I think you want to have you want to have a lot of questions for your team as to how they're feeling a lot of the time, and then occasionally share some of those vulnerabilities with your team. Maybe, you could even set like, okay, I've got a running tally here happening. Perhaps once or twice a week, I'll say how I'm struggling on this or I need help on this. But absolutely, I hear what you're saying. You don't want to be that person who's like, oh God, everything's on fire all the time. You want to give your team a sense of stability as well. So yeah, it is a balance. Other than just trying to keep a tally yourself, I think that's probably how I'd approach it. Just be conscious of how often you're sharing. And maybe also just be transparent and say, okay, I'm stressed about this because of this reason. And then maybe find those solutions with your team. So at the end of the team call, you've all got a way forward. I think that would be the way I'd approach it. Anything else? Yep.
I love the title of your... I love the title that you've given this, because there's a lot of 18-year-olds, 16-year-olds even, and younger that are running Discord chats for their games that they're making, and they're already showing a lot of these skills that you're talking about. And one thing that's really positive is they don't know it yet, but they're already showing a lot of those capabilities. And with your talk, we can see where they can go next to keep going. So congratulations. I think you're doing a fantastic job there.
Oh, thank you very much. Thank you. Yeah, and I think this talk is valuable to help. It was helpful for me to put this together because I was able to see some of these things you do instinctively, and it helps to have the labels on them and identify them and reinforce them. So yeah, thank you. Appreciate that. Cool.
That's all time.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, everyone. Appreciate it.